The snow fell softly, blanketing the city in a quiet, white stillness. The streets were empty, the shops closed, and the only sound was the distant chime of church bells ringing in Christmas Eve. In the heart of the park, where the lampposts cast long shadows on the frozen ground, a man sat alone on a bench. He was wrapped in a heavy coat, his breath visible in the cold air, but his eyes were distant, lost in thought. He was a millionaire, a man who had everything money could buy, luxury cars, a mansion, a name that commanded respect. But tonight, he felt nothing but emptiness. The holidays had always been a reminder of what he lacked, a family, a child, someone to call his own. He had tried everything, doctors, treatments, even prayers, but fate had denied him the one thing he truly wanted. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a small figure emerged from the shadows. It was a girl, no older than 10, dressed in tattered clothes and shivering from the cold. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and filled with a strange intensity. She walked toward him slowly, her bare feet crunching in the snow. The millionaire noticed her and frowned. "What are you doing out here, child? It's freezing. Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she stopped in front of him and held out a small, wrapped gift. It was a simple box, tied with a frayed red ribbon. Her voice was soft but clear as she spoke. "Merry Christmas, Father." The millionaire froze. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. "What did you say?" The girl didn't repeat herself. She placed the gift in his hands, her fingers brushing against his for just a second. Her touch was ice-cold, but it sent a strange warmth through him. "This is for you," she said. "You'll need it." Before he could say another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. The millionaire stared after her, his mind racing. Who was she? Why had she called him father? And what was in the box? He looked down at the gift in his hands. It was small and light, but it felt heavy with meaning. His fingers trembled as he untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a single key, old and tarnished, with a strange symbol etched into its surface. The millionaire turned the key over in his hands, his confusion growing. What did it open? And why had the girl given it to him? As he sat there, staring at the key, a strange feeling washed over him, a mix of curiosity, fear, and something he couldn't quite name. It was as if the girl's appearance had unlocked something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. The key was just the beginning, and the girl's words, "Merry Christmas, Father," were a clue to a mystery that would unravel his carefully constructed world and lead him down a path he never expected. The snow continued to fall, covering the park in a blanket of white. Somewhere in the distance, the church bells chimed again, marking the arrival of Christmas. But for the millionaire, the night was far from over. He stood up, clutching the key tightly in his hand, and walked into the darkness, determined to find answers. The millionaire's mansion stood at the edge of the city, a sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and iron gates. It was a place of luxury, filled with expensive art, marble floors, and every comfort money could buy. But as he stepped inside that night, the house felt colder and emptier than ever. He walked through the grand hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The key the beggar girl had given him was still clutched tightly in his hand. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was important, that it held the answer to the questions swirling in his mind. Who was she? Why had she called him father? And what did the key open? He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself it was just a strange encounter, nothing more. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The girl's words had struck a chord in him, stirring something he had tried to forget. The millionaire poured himself a drink and sat down in his study, staring at the key. It was old, its surface worn and tarnished, but the symbol etched into it was clear, a small, intricate design that looked like a tree with roots spreading out. He didn't recognize it, but it felt familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. As the hours passed, he found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept going back to the girl, her pale face, her wide eyes, the way she had looked at him with such intensity. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had known him, that there was something important she wanted him to understand. The next morning, he decided to investigate. He started by searching for any records of the girl, orphanages, shelters, anything that might give him a clue. But there was nothing. It was as if she had appeared out of thin air and vanished just as quickly. Frustrated, he turned his attention to the key. He tried it on every lock in the house, doors, cabinets, even the safe in his study, but it didn't fit. The symbol on the key nagged at him, though. He felt like he had seen it before, but he couldn't remember where. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard a noise. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was enough to make him sit up. He listened carefully, his heart pounding. The sound came again, this time louder, a soft tapping, like someone knocking on glass. He got up and followed the sound, his footsteps slow and cautious. It led him to the window in his study. He pulled back the curtains and froze. Outside, standing in the snow, was the beggar girl. She was just as he remembered her, tattered clothes, pale face, wide eyes. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, in the shadows, were other children. They stood silently, their faces solemn, their eyes fixed on him. The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. He blinked, and they were gone. The yard was empty, the snow undisturbed. He stumbled back, his mind racing. Had he imagined it? Or had they really been there? The next few days were a blur. Strange things kept happening, unexplained noises, flickering lights, the feeling of being watched. He tried to ignore it, to focus on his work, but the key and the girl were always on his mind. Finally, he decided to visit the one place he hadn't checked, the old orphanage on the outskirts of the city. It had been abandoned for years, but something told him it was connected to the key and the girl. As he drove through the snow-covered streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led somewhere, that the girl was guiding him towards something important. When he arrived at the orphanage, he felt a chill run down his spine. The building was old and crumbling, its windows broken and its walls covered in ivy. It looked like a place forgotten by time. He stepped inside, the key clutched tightly in his hand. The air was cold and damp, and the floor creaked under his feet. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he had to find it. As he explored the building, he found old photographs and records, remnants of the children who had once lived there. And then, in a dusty corner of the basement, he found it, a door with a lock that matched the key. His hands trembled as he inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing a hidden room. Inside, he found something that would change everything. The hidden room was small and dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. The millionaire stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was filled with old files, photographs, and strange equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. He picked up a file and brushed off the dust. The label on the front read, Project Redemption. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were documents detailing a secret project funded by his own company years ago. The project had been aimed at creating enhanced children with extraordinary abilities, like heightened intelligence, empathy, and even the ability to predict future events. The millionaire's stomach turned as he read through the files. The experiments had been conducted on orphan children, taken from the very orphanage he was standing in. The children had been subjected to painful procedures, their lives treated as nothing more than data points in a cold, calculated experiment. And then he saw her. In one of the photographs, there she was, the beggar girl. She looked younger, her face less haunted, but it was unmistakably her. The caption beneath the photo read, Subject 7, Exceptional Empathy and Predictive Abilities. The millionaire felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had known about the project in a vague, distant way, but he had never paid much attention to it. It had been one of many ventures his company had invested in, and he had trusted his team to handle the details. But now, seeing the evidence in front of him, he realized the truth. He had funded this. He had allowed this to happen. He sank to the floor, the weight of his guilt crushing him. The girl had called him father because, in a way, he was. He had played a role in creating her, in shaping her life into something tragic and painful. As he sat there, overwhelmed by emotion, he noticed something else in the room. A small, handwritten note tucked beneath one of the files. He picked it up and read it. To whoever finds this, know that the children were more than experiments. They were hope. They were the future. And they deserve to be remembered. The note was signed with the same symbol that was etched into the key. The millionaire's mind raced. Who had written this? And why had they left it here? He spent hours going through the files, piecing together the story. The project had been shut down years ago, after one of the children, Subject 7, the beggar girl, had escaped. The others had been relocated, their fates unknown. But the girl had never forgotten. She had lived on the streets, surviving however she could, but she had never given up hope. And now, she had reached out to him, the man who had unknowingly played a role in her suffering. Why? The answer came to him in a flash of clarity. She wanted him to know the truth. She wanted him to make amends. The millionaire left the orphanage that night with a heavy heart but a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know how, but he was determined to right the wrongs of the past. The millionaire returned to the orphanage the next day, determined to uncover the full truth. The building seemed even more foreboding in the daylight, its broken windows and crumbling walls a stark reminder of the neglect it had endured. But he didn't let the eerie atmosphere deter him. He had to know everything. He started in the basement, where he had found the hidden room, and began sifting through the remaining files. Each document revealed more about the experiments, how the children had been selected, the procedures they had undergone, and the toll it had taken on them. One file stood out. It was a journal, written by one of the scientists involved in the project. The entries were detailed and chilling, describing the children's reactions to the experiments, their pain, and their resilience. The scientist had clearly been conflicted, torn between their duty to the project and their growing guilt over what they were doing. The final entry was the most haunting: I can't do this anymore. The children are suffering, and I can't justify it, no matter how noble the goal. Subject 7 escaped last night, and I helped her. I don't know if she'll survive out there, but it's better than this. The others. I don't know what will happen to them. I've left clues for anyone who comes after me, hoping they'll find the truth and put an end to this madness. The millionaire's hands shook as he read the words. The scientist had tried to do the right thing, but it hadn't been enough. The project had continued, and the children had paid the price. He spent hours in the orphanage, piecing together the timeline of events. He learned that the project had been shut down abruptly after Subject 7's escape, but not before the remaining children had been sent to other facilities. Their whereabouts were unknown, but the millionaire was determined to find them. As he searched, he found more clues, photographs, letters, and even a map with locations marked. It seemed the scientist had left a trail, hoping someone would follow it and uncover the truth. The millionaire's guilt grew with each discovery, but so did his resolve. He couldn't change the past, but he could make amends. He could give these children the future they deserved. That night, as he left the orphanage, he felt a strange sense of peace. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was on the right path. The beggar girl had led him here for a reason, and he wasn't going to let her down. The millionaire's nights became restless. Sleep, when it came, was filled with vivid dreams that felt more like visions. In these dreams, the beggar girl appeared to him, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. She never spoke, but her presence was enough to convey a message, a call to action, a plea for redemption. One night, the dream was particularly vivid. He found himself standing in the abandoned orphanage, but it was no longer crumbling and dark. The walls were clean, the halls filled with laughter and light. Children ran past him, their faces bright with joy. Among them was the beggar girl, her tattered clothes replaced with a simple, clean dress. She smiled at him, a smile so full of warmth and hope that it brought tears to his eyes. Then the scene shifted. He was in a courtroom, standing before a judge. The room was packed with people, their faces blurred but their murmurs loud and accusing. On the stand was a man who looked eerily like him, but older, wearier. It was a version of himself, one burdened by guilt and regret. The beggar girl appeared beside him in the dream, her small hand reaching out to touch his. She pointed to the man on the stand, and suddenly, the millionaire understood. This was his future if he didn't act, a future filled with regret and the weight of his past mistakes. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing. The dream had felt so real, so urgent. He knew he couldn't ignore it. The next day, he began to take action. Using the clues he had found in the orphanage, he started tracking down the other children who had been part of the project. It wasn't easy, many of the records were incomplete or deliberately obscured, but he was determined. His first breakthrough came when he found a woman in her late 20s living in a small town a few hours away. She had been one of the children in the project, and though she had managed to build a life for herself, the scars of her past were still visible. The millionaire approached her cautiously, unsure of how she would react. To his surprise, she already knew who he was. "I've been waiting for you," she said quietly. "She told me you'd come." "She?" the millionaire asked, though he already knew the answer. "The girl," the woman replied. "The one who escaped. She visited me in a dream, just like she must have visited you. She said you'd make things right." The millionaire felt a lump in his throat. The beggar girl had been guiding him all along, not just through his dreams but through the lives of the others she had touched. Over the next few weeks, he found more of the children, now adults, scattered across the country. Each of them had a story, a life shaped by the experiments they had endured. But they also had hope, a belief that things could be better. The millionaire used his wealth and influence to help them, setting up a foundation to provide support, education, and opportunities for those affected by the project. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. As he worked, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. The emptiness that had haunted him for so long began to fade, replaced by a growing determination to make a difference. But the beggar girl's final message still eluded him. He knew there was more to her story, more she wanted him to understand. One night, as he sat in his study, he had another vision. This time, he saw her standing in a field of flowers, her face radiant with joy. She held out her hand, and in it was a single seed. "Plant it," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And watch it grow." When he woke up, he knew what he had to do. The millionaire knew it was time to confront the past head-on. He couldn't keep the secrets buried any longer. The beggar girl's final message, her plea to plant the seed and watch it grow, had given him the courage to do what he had been avoiding. It was time to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He called a press conference, something he had never done before. The media buzzed with curiosity. What could the reclusive millionaire possibly have to announce? On the day of the conference, the room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. The millionaire stepped up to the podium, his hands trembling but his voice steady. "Years ago," he began, "my company funded a project called Redemption. It was supposed to be about creating a better future, but it became something dark and cruel. Children, orphans, the most vulnerable among us, were subjected to experiments that no one should ever endure. I didn't know the full extent of it at the time, but that doesn't excuse my role in it. I funded it. I allowed it to happen. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. He went on to describe what he had learned, the experiments, the suffering, the lives that had been forever changed. He spoke of the beggar girl, the one who had escaped and later reached out to him, guiding him to the truth. She called me father, he said, his voice breaking. And in a way, I was. I played a part in creating her pain, but she didn't seek revenge. She sought redemption, not just for herself, but for all of us. He announced the creation of the Redemption Foundation, dedicated to helping the survivors of the project and others like them. He pledged his entire fortune to the cause, vowing to spend the rest of his life making amends. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some praised his courage, calling him a hero for exposing the truth. Others condemned him, accusing him of trying to buy his way out of guilt. But the millionaire didn't care about the opinions of others anymore. He had done what he knew was right. In the days that followed, the story dominated the news. Investigations were launched, and more secrets came to light. The people responsible for the project were held accountable, and the survivors began to receive the support they needed. But for the millionaire, the hardest part was yet to come. The millionaire's life had changed completely. Gone were the days of luxury and isolation. His mansion, once a symbol of his wealth, was now a place of activity and purpose. He had turned it into a headquarters for the Redemption Foundation, a place where survivors of the project could come for help, support, and community. The foundation grew quickly, thanks to his dedication and the generosity of others who were moved by the story. Scholarships were set up for the survivors, therapy programs were established, and efforts were made to reunite them with their families or find them new ones. The millionaire worked tirelessly, pouring his heart and soul into every detail. But it wasn't just about the foundation. The millionaire himself was changing. The guilt that had once consumed him was slowly being replaced by a sense of purpose. He found joy in the small moments, seeing a survivor smile for the first time in years, watching a child who had once been lost find a new home, hearing stories of resilience and hope. One day, as he was reviewing plans for a new community center, he received a letter. It was from one of the survivors, a young woman who had been part of the project as a child. "Thank you," the letter read. "I spent so many years feeling like I didn't matter, like my life was just an experiment. But because of you, I know that's not true. You've given me a chance to start over, and I'll never forget that." The millionaire read the letter over and over, tears streaming down his face. It was the first time he felt like he was truly making a difference. But even as he found fulfillment in his work, he couldn't shake the feeling that the beggar girl's story wasn't over. She had guided him this far, but there was still something missing. One night, as he sat in his study, he had another vision. This time, he saw her standing in a field of flowers, just as she had before. But now, the field was vast and endless, filled with light and color. She smiled at him and held out her hand. "It's time," she said. "Come and see." When he woke up, he knew what he had to do. The millionaire followed the vision's guidance, traveling to the field of flowers he had seen in his dream. It was a real place, a quiet meadow on the outskirts of the city, untouched by time and development. As he walked through the field, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of birds singing. At the center of the meadow, he found a small, weathered stone. It was a memorial, simple and unassuming, with the same symbol etched into it that had been on the key, the tree with spreading roots. Beneath the symbol were the words, "In memory of those who were lost but never forgotten. Their hope lives on." The millionaire knelt before the stone, his heart heavy but at peace. He realized now that this was the beggar girl's final gift to him, not just the key, not just the truth, but this place. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. As he sat there, he thought about everything he had been through, the guilt, the pain, the journey to redemption. He thought about the beggar girl and the other children, their lives forever changed but not defined by their suffering. And he thought about the future, the lives he could still touch, the difference he could still make. He knew now that redemption wasn't about erasing the past or making up for his mistakes. It was about learning from them, growing from them, and using that growth to help others. It was about planting seeds of hope and watching them grow, just as the beggar girl had shown him. When he returned home, he felt a sense of closure he had never known before. He continued his work with the Redemption Foundation, but now it was with a lighter heart and a clearer purpose. He knew the beggar girl's spirit lived on in the lives of the survivors, in the work he was doing, and in the hope he was spreading. Years later, as an old man, he returned to the meadow one last time. The field was still beautiful, still filled with light and life. He sat by the memorial, his hand resting on the stone, and closed his eyes. In his final moments, he saw her again, the beggar girl, her face radiant with joy. She reached out her hand, and he took it, feeling a warmth and peace he had never known. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've done well." And with that, he let go, knowing he had finally found the redemption he had been searching for.